So we have on the show today with us Professor Chomsky, who simply does not need any introduction. I wanted to ask you, Professor Chomsky, the first question is, I mean, you're on the record criticizing the UK and the US on how they dealt with the coronavirus. I want to ask you the first question being, what advice would you give to UK and US politicians on how to deal with the coronavirus?
With coronavirus? Well, first of all, I would, they're different. Britain at first took the worst possible stance, caused a disaster, but then they reversed course, and they're now moving towards what sane countries have done and contained it. The US is a complete disaster, the worst in the world. They waited for until mid-March to begin to take the steps that everyone knew was necessary. US intelligence was telling them, high US health officials were telling them. It was obvious, even to newspaper readers, but Trump was too busy looking at his TV ratings and playing golf, so he just decided to kill tens of thousands of people. Now, in a desperate effort to cover up their crimes, they're trying to blame somebody else. So blame the Chinese, blame the World Health Organization, blame the governors. What he's doing right now is making the crisis as bad as possible in order to improve his election possibilities. As you've seen, he said, well, the federal government can't do anything. At first, the line was, I'm the ruler of the world, I do everything, just listen to me. Now the line is, we can't do anything. It's up to the governors. We don't give you any help, of course, but it's your problem to deal with it. And if things go wrong, it's your fault, not my fault. If anything happens to come out right, I'll take credit for it. He's basically informing the governors, you're the ones responsible, not me, okay? That's guaranteed, but I'm not going to give any help. Federal government has all the wealth and resources, but we're not going to do anything. We're too busy with other things like killing people abroad. And of course, it's going to make it worse. Then he comes out with these crazy pronouncements. May 1st, we're going to open everything. Then says the opposite the next day. In fact, I don't know if this is conscious or not. Maybe it's just intuitive with him, but he's following a very clever strategy. The liberal press criticizes him for saying one thing today and the opposite tomorrow, and so on. But that's a very smart strategy. It means that whatever happens, he'll be validated. You shoot arrows randomly, one of them will hit the target. And then you can say, see, I knew it all along. And it'll be amplified by his echo chamber in Fox News. He'll say that was the most brilliant thing ever done in history, and you're off. It's a very clever strategy. And the same with leaving it all to the governors. So if anything goes wrong, it's not my fault. We happen to have a sociopathic megalomaniac in the White House, and it's causing enormous damages, not only to the United States, but to the world. Right now, in fact, if you notice, he's encouraging the armed militias, which are, carrying out demonstrations at state houses to say we want our freedom back. In other words, we want to be able to infect everybody. No one else in the world is doing this except Bolsonaro in Brazil. He's even crazier than he is.
So do you think that moving in the direction of countries like South Korea and Japan, sorry, not Japan, but South Korea, Hong Kong, and other countries like that would be the correct kind of course of action for countries like UK and the US?
There's no question about it. Just look at what happened. Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, New Zealand, have it pretty much under control. In fact, China too, because they've been following the sensible measures proposed by just about all health specialists in World Health Organization. And furthermore, they started right away. that China had, despite all the screaming about China, they had given out all the relevant information by January 9th, as soon as they discovered it. The Chinese scientists had identified by then that it was a coronavirus, had sequenced the genome, given the information to the entire world. At that point, it was, a lot of details were unknown, but it was basically understood. And the countries that have governments that are concerned for their own populations acted right away. Europe sort of waited a while. You can't believe these Orientals, but finally started acting. As I said, the UK started off with Boris Johnson's craziness, but then went back to something like what other countries are doing. The United States is alone. It's the only country that's so far off the spectrum that the United States is the one country that cannot even provide data about how many cases there are and how many deaths. Every other country at least has data.
Mm. And on a personal level, how are you coping with the lockdown?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Look, we're privileged. We live in a place where we can stay alone, nobody nearby, get by on things. Other people don't have that privilege. We're living in if we were still living in an apartment in Cambridge, it would be much harder, even though that would still be privilege. There are plenty of people who don't even have that. And of course, the worst of all are the really poor and underprivileged people, and homeless people, people in slums, people in prisons. For them, it's a total disaster. And the United States is uniquely savage in this respect. So if you're unemployed, and if suppose you lose your job, you've been, well, that means you lose your health insurance. We don't have a guaranteed health program. So that means, if you get symptoms of the virus, okay, go die. This is way precedes Trump, of course. Comes from being a business-run society bound by the strict neoliberal rules. So totally dysfunctional.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on another note, I wanted to ask you another question. You're known for your support kind of for minorities to bolster the voice of the otherwise like voiceless people. So I wanted to ask a question because obviously you've written Manufacturing Consent, which is very well known. First of all, I'm as a member of the Muslim community very indebted to you and very much appreciative of what you've done for my community. As I'm sure many Muslims feel the same way. But I wanted to ask you your advice on something. Taking the example of, for example, this YouTube channel that I'm going to be putting this on, as well as many other kind of Muslim YouTube channels that try and educate people about Islam. To what extent do you think the utilization of social media is important for bolstering the voice of an otherwise voiceless people, minorities in the West, for example?
Well, social media offer the opportunity, but somebody has to grasp the opportunity.
Right.
And there have been, that others are going to be grasping it. The ones who want to sow hate and anger and racism and conformity, they're going to be using it. The question is whether others will. Now, this goes way back, incidentally. If you look back at when cable television was introduced, there was a legislation in Congress. The spectrum, electronic spectrum, of course, is publicly owned, and it was given as a gift to a couple of major private enterprises. We decide to give you that gift, you can have cable television. But there was a provision in the original act that required the big cable companies to set up small community-based cable installations. They're in communities all over the country. They're not, Fox News, but they have reasonable facilities. I'm sure better facilities than you have. Have they been used by the left? They've been taken over almost by right-wing crazies. A couple of them are used and are very effective, but it's rare. I've talked on them. Well, I've been trying for years to get left-wing groups that complain rightly about being cut off from the media to use these facilities. I mean, you reach a whole community that way. And if you have good stuff, people will tune in. You have a major effect. Barely been done. Same with social media. Yes, they can be effective, but you've got to use them.
Yeah, I mean, we found that, I mean, obviously there's lots of studies like Pew Research, which shows that the more interaction you have with minority groups, the less likely there is to be discrimination, the more likely there is to be tolerance and acceptance. We found that just educating people on the basics of Islamic belief, things like that we believe in one God. Many people are very ignorant of the fact that we believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and from the Christian community, and that we believe that Prophet Muhammad is the final messenger. That we have very similar beliefs to Christians and Jews in the sense that we believe that there's one God worthy of worship, and just very basic things like that. I think, from my experience, just educating people on the basics of Islam, as simple as it may be, has actually had a profound effect on social cohesion and harmony, on tolerance, and so on and so forth. So what I wanted to ask you was, do you think that the coronavirus now is putting people into kind of like an existential angst? Do you think that this is actually prompting people to ask about the ultimate questions in life? Some things like, why am I here? What's the purpose of life? Do you think it will have that effect?
Depends on people like you. It could have that effect if people use the opportunity. Otherwise, it won't.
Right.
And we know that there are some who are going to use the opportunity. Exactly the people who are sowing hatred, bitterness, fear of others, racism, and so on. They'll be using it. Question is whether anybody else will.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, with Ramadan approaching, Ramadan's about
Ramadan's
4 or 5 days away. It's a time where we fast, we pray, and we read the Quran, which is the holy book of the Muslims. With that, I mean, do you think that if people were to read a holy scripture like the Quran, and they educate themselves on holy scriptures like the Quran, that once again will increase social cohesion and interaction between people in society?
It's always the same answer.
Yes.
Depends how people use the opportunity. Can't predict. You could never predict the rise of any social movement.
Right.
And if you'd asked in 1960, can the civil rights movement ever develop? Any sane person would say it's impossible. The country's too racist. Well, it did. Same with everything else.
Right.
To take off. I have to get off to another appointment.
Okay, no problem. I'll just ask you one final question, I guess, on this point. Obviously now, I think that a lot of people are realizing that with the coronavirus, that human beings are very fragile, and also the fact that the world is a very interdependent place. So the actions of someone obviously in China will have an impact on someone here in the UK. You've talked about using opportunities, and obviously lots of people will use the opportunity in a negative way. How can we use the opportunities, minority groups or any group, to try and create positivity and harmony in this time of pandemic? So what kind of things would you advise us to do in order to try and create more tolerance and harmony in society? What kind of advice would you give on that front?
You can do everything from talking to your neighbors,
yes,
up to joining organized groups that are pressing for genuine internationalism. You can be educating people about some very elementary facts in Europe. So there's something in Europe, now excluding Britain, that's called the European Union.
Yes.
Okay. How are they reacting? Germany's the richest, most powerful country. They've pretty much handled it for themselves. They have a low death rate. And a couple of miles across the border is one of the real hotspots, northern Italy. A lot of people dying, mostly elderly people. They have a much more elderly population in Germany. They need help and assistance. Are they getting it from Germany? That's the European Union. Are they getting any? Yeah, from the superpower across the Atlantic, Cuba, the one country which is showing how to be genuinely internationalist, as they've been doing for decades. Okay, that's a country that's not exactly in the optimal conditions. It's been crushed by US violence and terror and economic warfare ever since it became independent. So it's not in great shape. But nevertheless, they've been teaching the world a lesson in internationalism, not their oppressor, and they're doing it once again, incidentally, with Chinese assistance. Okay, are there some lessons there about genuine internationalism? Are there some lessons we can bring to people? I mean, I think so. And this goes all the way up to genuinely creating a progressive international. Actually, that's happening. And you can take part in it. Their first international conference is coming up in November. This was called by Bernie Sanders in the United States, Yanis Varoufakis in Europe, founder of the M25, which is working on this across Europe. It's possible to become a participant and a supporter. The idea is to create a progressive international, which will bring in the rest of the world, Global South, others, which will counter the reactionary international that's being constructed in the White House, which is supposed to run it, with Britain, especially now that it's out of Europe, as a kind of a subsidiary, a vassal who does what the US orders. In the Middle East, al-Sisi, the murderous dictator of Egypt, Trump favorite, the Gulf dictatorships, nice guys like MBS, who likes to chop people up he doesn't like, and so on. The United Arab Emirates, with the dictatorships. Israel moving so far to the right that you can hardly see it. It's had kind of tacit relations with the Gulf dictatorships for years. They're now coming out in the open. India, under a Hindu nationalist fanatic, was trying to destroy the remnants of Indian democracies, an obvious member. Orban in Hungary, turning it into a dictatorship. Salvini in Italy, who gets his kicks out of getting people to die in the Mediterranean when they're fleeing from what Europe has done to Africa. They put together all these guys. You have a nice reactionary international. The progressive international is an effort to counter that.
Yes.
And you can do all the way from talking to your neighbor up to supporting the international. No shortage.
Yes.
Really have to
Thank you very much, Noam Chomsky. I'm going to gift you with a copy of the Quran that's been translated by one of my good friends, Mustafa Khattab. It's called the Clear Quran. And also gift you with another book that my friend has written called The Divine Reality by Hamza Zosi. So these are two gifts we're going to send you by PDF. But once again, as a gesture of appreciation, that's very small, a small gesture of appreciation I give you for all the work that you've done for all the minority groups and the justice that you've spread around the world. So thank you very much. Professor Noam Chomsky, and hopefully we'll be hearing your voice soon.